Good morning, everybody. This is Ruche and Lofer, the podcast. We're very happy this morning to have a very esteemed guest, Mr. Alastair Crooke from Italy. We will talk about a lot of stuff covering Gaza, but also Ukraine, Iran, maybe also Venezuela. I would like to ask Jean-Daniel now to make a brief introduction of our guest.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to welcome you, Alastair. You have been such a close and trustworthy friend for over 15 years now. I think we met the first time in 2009 in Beirut, and ever since I have admired the quality of your analysis and also of your information. Thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.
You have had 30 years of work with the British government in the intelligence services, MI6, starting in Afghanistan, if I'm not mistaken. And then you moved to the EU diplomacy. You served as an advisor to Javier Solana when he was a special envoy for the Middle East. And in this context, I think you were very instrumental in ending the Second Intifada back in 2003 with a hudna between all the main factions. In this context, in this work, you had the opportunity, you had to work with all Palestinian factions and beyond, also in Lebanon and elsewhere. And that gave you an intimate knowledge of these Islamist movements. By the way, you wrote a book also about what animates Islamist movements and political Islam in that part of the world. So thank you very much for being with us. I think now you run a think tank called Conflicts Forum, which used to be based in Beirut. Now you are in Italy. As I told you, I continue to use your weekly comments as sort of my Sunday's prayer. I like to read it with a coffee on Sunday mornings because that offers me always the opportunity to think and to contemplate the world from a different perspective, which is yours. Thank you very much for being here. And maybe because it's a very topical issue, the Trump peace plan has been announced earlier this week in the presence of Bibi Netanyahu. Some present it as a sort of surrender order for Hamas. Other people say it was a trap to Netanyahu. What to think about this peace plan?
May I just start off by saying if any of you want to join Jean-Luc Bayrou, they're available on our Substack, which is called Conflicts Forum. It's not my name. I'm just saying this because if you look under my name, you won't find it. But it's called Conflicts Forum, Substack.com. Janelle, you asked about this peace proposal. I think there are a number of things to really say about it. I won't go into details because it's complicated, 21 points. But essentially, a proposal that was outlined, and probably most of your listeners have got an idea that it's all about a withdrawal from Gaza by the Israeli forces, and that then there would be, if you like, an independent security force coming in to take over from Hamas, and Hamas, something political would happen to Hamas that would either be removed or disarmed or whatever, but would not take part in governance. I mean, that's a very brief gist. However, it isn't the plan, because what happened after it was announced, and this plan was nothing new. There's been touted a long time of, it was really the work of, first of all, the Ron Dama, the close associate, the Netanyahu whisperer, and also Steve Witkoff, and Kushner, and Blair. Blair has worked very closely with Kushner on the Gaza part of this plan that has come up. So it was basically a plan to help Israel out of a problem, to get, if you like, a ceasefire, give a sort of a passage for Israel. And the aim of it, from Netanyahu's point of view, is to get some form of achievement, a prize. I think we've got just what we want, that Hamas is going to be destroyed, and Gaza is going to be run by an independent force, and ultimately by Tony Blair and Trump as the sort
Is it
of... Yeah, I was just going to say, because what happened in the 11th hour were substantial changes enforced by Netanyahu in the last minute. After the 6-hour meeting between Witkoff and Kushner and Doma, after that came Netanyahu, and he changed the following things, and they're quite important. As you know, Hamas from the beginning, and has been consistent throughout this process, has said that a to war means the complete withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza, the complete withdrawal, and that is will trigger the release of hostages. And of course, what he changed was the whole withdrawal scheme. So the withdrawal scheme is now in 3 phases. And the last phase means that they're not going to withdraw completely from Gaza, even in the last resort. But the first 2 phases means that during, if you like, release of hostages phase, the Israeli armed forces will be across the majority of Gaza. There's no withdrawal, in other words. That's the first point. There is it. And the second point that he included in this, which was that the second point was that any withdrawal or moves to these 3 stages of withdrawal are going to have metrics undisclosed, undescribed, that will depend on Hamas and Hamas's disarmament. That's the third point that he included in the thing, that is disarmed completely. That has also been a Hamas red line from the beginning. They've said, yes, we can accept that we will not be involved in the administration of Gaza. And I have to say, having known that movement for many years, this is a long-standing. I remember Yassin saying it. They don't want to be the political. They don't want the politics. They were much more involved in the social structures of Gaza rather than in the nitty-gritty of the politics. So they said we can leave that, but disarmament. And if you allow me just a second or so to give a personal anecdote, which was a long time ago. I was involved in a peace process between the South African government and SWAPO, the SWAPO from Namibia, Southwest Africa. And there was an attempt to try, and it was agreed that there should be, if you like, a political process, and it would lead to SWAPO's disarmament. Now, the contact group came, rather like we have today with the Europeans, wouldn't speak to SWAPO directly because they were terrorists, yes, communists, so they wouldn't speak to them. So it was left to people like myself and others to sort of be the interlocutors, but they didn't get the feel. They didn't meet them. They didn't get a sense of, who are these people or what are they talking about? And so then they came to the disarmament proposals, which were that SWAPO would be contained in a fenced area, just like is being proposed in Gaza, were to be contained in a fenced off, then the disarmament would come. And then I remember the key point was that SWAPO said to us, ultimately, you mean to say we are going to be put into a fenced area, disarmed, and the South African Defence Force, the SDF armed, are going to surround us. Is that right? And they said, you must be nuts if you think we'll ever agree to that. And it took 10 years before we could get to it. But this is roughly what is being asked of Hamas, in a sense. They will be reduced and moved into these enclaves and disarmed as, if you like, the Israeli defense at the first, if you like, withdrawal line, which is just outside Gaza City, essentially.
But isn't it still, let's say, I don't know how to say that, a change compared to the plan that had been pushed before by the most extreme wings of Likud and of the Israeli government, which was to push not just the Hamas, but the whole Gaza population in a corner of Gaza, and then to reconstruct and probably allow the settlers to come back and do this kind of Riviera, Dubai type that we have seen just a few weeks ago. Isn't that a significant change compared to a real estate project?
What I suspect is that this project is not going to succeed. I don't know what Hamas is going to say.
Can we say even more that it is supposed and designed to not succeed?
It is designed to not succeed. So,
and then to be able to say to Hamas, "Oh, we are of good faith. We did something, and you refuse peace."
Yes, you refuse peace, and this is when it's set up as numbers for Hamas in this way.
Yes, but
and then of course, then Jean-Daniel, to get back to your point, then that opens a way for the Israeli right to go on with their settlement plan. And the ultimate aim of this, which is causing huge tensions with Egypt at the moment, so clear that the aim ultimately is to put, if you like, Gaza occupants to the Sinai and to the West Bank across the river to Jordan. So
but that
I don't
can never
think these are
happen.
over.
That can never happen.
It can never happen. It still may be attempted. And the question of whether it can happen. But as they put the Palestinians further and further towards a sort of small area around Rafah, the Egyptians, anyway, whether I think it's likely to, are very fearful. They've deployed, I think it's something like 40,000 Egyptian troops at Rafah, and they've deployed also a whole series of Chinese air defense systems, 4 sophisticated air defense systems into Sinai. These are not intended, for Hamas. They're intended for Israel because they think Israel is going to break all the treaty agreements with Egypt, open the gates of Rafah, and sort of head Palestinians across into it. Now, Egyptians may be wrong, but that is their serious estimate. There are actors in this exercise, not just, commentators from standing apart. They are very, very concerned about it, and they are expecting, and the latest talks from coming out from Sisi were describing Israel as the enemy, and an enemy to be defeated. I mean, it was very different language from, for example, what you've been hearing for some of the Gulf states. It was strong language. He spoke this in a speech at Doha. You want to check it. Very harsh language against Israel. And they are deploying forces in the expectation that that is what ultimately is the end of this anticipated end, when this is refused by Hamas or slow run, or Israel says, well, Hamas hasn't stuck to the details of the agreement.
Of course.
So it's changing anyway. And when they say that, and I just make some one particular point, because I've been tracking this, and I think Danielle knows, about the change in Israel and how we sort of move from Ben-Gurion to Kahan in terms of, what is Zionism today. It's a very different Zionism from the one we thought we knew in Israel, more than a year ago. It's quite changed. It's, apocalyptic and messianic. What I do know from the Mizrahi, who are now in power, having that power, I'm not about to give it up.
Yes. It descends on itself.
Yes, it descends, and they're not about to give it up. So the idea that, Netanyahu is, can be pushed aside and there'll be some, person who will come in, Gantz or someone will take over. This whole project set up between Netanyahu and Trump, this bit of fierce set up by Netanyahu and Trump, it's a process for taking forward a pathway to elections in Israel next year, and already, and we track it, and we put it in where we do a weekly summary of what's going on in the Hebrew press, and the Hebrew press is full of the plans from the right to make sure that they gerrymander the election to ensure that the right will win any election next year. You can read it in from it, because we put these summaries of what's going on, and not only just in the press but in the channels.
I would like to know, you are in a unique position to shed a light on something that we all find, I think, very bizarre, is this reapparition of Tony Blair in the midst of all this mess. What is he doing here?
What is he doing here is, well, it really comes down to one person. I'm sure you know this person, Larry Ellison. Larry Ellison is one of the richest pieces and Oracle. Ellison has been funding the Blair Institute with hundreds of millions of dollars. The Oracle personnel are tightly connected with the is IDF and with the 8200 intelligence service of Israel, have been having joint meetings for some years. Oracle, they have joint meetings both in London and in the Oracle headquarters and to the point at which they say, we are like one organization. We are so close. We are like a single entity. We've become every day there's interchange between Oracle and the Blair Institute. So if you want to know what's going on, that's what's going on. Larry Ellison, who's taken now charge, his son owns most of the mainstream media in the United States, been in the process of buying up the rest of it, who is going to be the key person who's brought up TikTok, and he has brought up the...
I read and I have received some drafts which shows that it seems Netanyahu came at the last minute and insisted to have Blair mentioned in this 21 point.
I mean, that's...
It almost seems like another trick to make sure Hamas would reject the plan.
Look, this was just theater. Blair has been in this for a long time. It was Kushner who commissioned the Blair Institute to draft the plan for the day after in Gaza. That came from him and his close connection with Oracle. I mean, this is the whole plan, the trust and the international security force was commissioned by Jared Kushner from the Blair Institute and paid for by Larry Ellison. It's pretty obvious what Blair's function. So being in there a month ago, he had a meeting with Trump, Will Witkoff, and Ron Verma, who's in all of these meetings. He's, the closest to Netanyahu. And that's where it came from. It was entirely a Blair Kushner drama construct that has been produced to try and set the idea of, that peace is available, and if it doesn't happen, it's not Netanyahu or Israel's fault. It's the fault, as usual, of the Palestinians. Never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity.
Speaking of it,
then it means that according to what has been said in Washington, then the Israelis will have all freedom to finish, whatever that means. But do the Israelis actually can make it? Can they make it? They have been fighting Hamas for 2 years now.
No, they won't make it. It won't succeed. I mean, they've already put there, this was supposed to be, remember that Netanyahu promised Witkoff and Trump that it'll be very quick. We're going to go into Gaza and it'll be over very quickly. And Trump sort of said, yeah, okay, good. Good if you can defeat them. And of course, what happened, first of all, the Chief of Defense Staff of Israel says, I don't agree. I just think, this isn't a sensible plan. It doesn't make any sense. And we don't have the troops. And Israel is desperately short, because many of the reservists are not coming to, they've been called up and then
close to 40%. Close to 40% are not coming to.
Yes, they are into the Israeli estimate.
Yes,
they're not going to move in Gaza without being in a tank or an armored vehicle. They won't walk there.
Speaking of which, how will they go about attacking Iran? Because it's now very much talked about. It seems to be an almost certainty in the days to come, maybe the weeks to come, that there would be another strike on Iran. Could you give us your view on this, and what's the ultimate purpose, not only of Israel, but especially of America, on attacking Iran for a second time this year?
Well, I think the plan and the motive was the same as it was on the 12th of June. It's been said by Woodcroft, and it's also said by Steve Anton Barak, his other envoy, both of them close friends. And they've said, to normalize Israel, to reduce Israel's fear and uncertainty, we have to deal with Iran. Iran is the head of the snake. It must be dealt with. And when they say that explicitly, I'm not sort of interpreting.
Yeah.
Barak says this very clearly, that, the feathers, we can't, Gaza, to serve Gaza finally needs the failure in Iran. And what we saw on the 12th, and I know because I was talking to people who, had got calls from Trump on that night, and he was so excited on the 12th, and he said, they're going to win, aren't they? They're going to do it. I mean, these Israelis are wonderful people at this, and they're going to achieve it. And what he thought was going to happen was that he'd been promised and told Iran is a house of cards. Israel will do this decapitation, will attack, and the house of cards will collapse, and it'll be like Syria. And in Syria, we just walked in after Assad went. We went, the leadership will be gone, Khamenei will be gone. We just walk in and take it over, and we took over the oil and gas, giving America, if you like, hegemony over the energy of the.
Okay, so that would be the strategic objective of a new attack on Iran, would be to have the dominance over the energy markets to help solve the debt crisis in the United States.
Yes.
The same for Venezuela.
And the same for Venezuela and Argentina, by the way, done in a different way, in a sweetheart, but they have big shale fields, oil and gas shale fields. And it's the same project in the sense to have Middle East hegemony, and Venezuela is ultimately about Western Hemisphere, a demonstration of U.S. hegemony, or potential hegemony, over the Latin America sphere of influence. So two key energy areas falling under, if you like, the U.S. purview.
But then there is also the China factor, which means that they could squeeze China by having this dominance over the energy market, since China's weakness is they have to import their energy, in particular their oil and gas. So there are sort of double objective, the public debt, but China.
Yes, of course, and this is why I was at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the signing of the agreement for Siberia 2. So that won't be completed for some years, 2030, I think. But already there is a big increase in Russian oil, and of course it's Iranian. And also, China is the biggest customer for Venezuelan oil, by the way. I can't remember how many barrels a day it is, but it is the biggest customer. Venezuelan oil is a very low ebb in terms of its exports for all sorts of reasons. But the one it does have, most of that goes to China.
Yeah, I checked this week and I found out that Venezuela has actually the largest proven reserves of oil in the world. And Iran is number 3.
But what you're saying about like this insistence on oil for America towards Iran, Venezuela, and maybe even Argentina speaks of President Trump interested, even in Gaza, even maybe in Ukraine, solely interested in his own domestic affairs, which is fair enough for a president. After all, that's his duty. It's on the panic mode.
Yes, it is. And I think I was chief executive BlackRock, the biggest hedge fund in the world. It's recently pushed very hard, and they said, come on, come clean. What are the black swans that we all face now? And he said, listen, it's this. The American stock market at the moment, with this unparalleled, extreme valuation, backstopping the debt market, the bond market in America. If the market, if the stock market collapses, the bond market, and America will be overwhelmed by its deficits. That's the big black swan. And others have added to it and said, the whole, since 2008, have had this huge new excess of credit being generated by new instruments, new ways. Everything is now sort of offering credit. It's been a huge explosion of credit. And the chief executive of the BIS, the Bank for International, said just the other day, I listened to him saying, do you know, now since 2008, the banks are pretty much okay. They're being sort of regulated. But 50% of credit is coming from the shadow market. And we don't have an idea what's going on there. We haven't a clue what's going on in that shadow market, let alone the market for stable coins and bitcoins and all these new instruments that Trump is inventing and putting out. No one has that. Many of those, I suspect, are really just Ponzi schemes. So, this is what they were. So I think Trump is desperate to get how to deal with the threat of the overwhelming overhang of deficits, which are getting bigger and bigger and are threatening, a financial crisis in the United States. I know it doesn't look like it at the moment. The stock market is doing wonderfully and all of that, but underneath, it's highly fragile. And people like Vought, the head of the budget percent, most people know that.
Isn't China key in that also? Because they are the second holder after Japan of American public debt. Well, theoretically, they could precipitate the fall of the market by selling their 700 billion or so they have in American debt. But aren't the Chinese the ones who are playing it wisely to say, we don't have any interest in promoting such Western world?
That's exactly right. They're waiting for it to happen of its own accord. But what they're doing is extraordinary and very radical, starting this, if you like, these Chinese, which is going to change the whole financial landscape. Not even announced very loudly, but more foreign exchange is now transacted on Chinese chips than on SWIFT. It happened some months ago, 1.7 trillion on China's chips in SWIFT. They don't make a big fuss about this. What they've also done is make the renminbi directly changeable into gold, and they've introduced a substation of the Shanghai in Hong Kong, which is outside of the capital controls of China, where you can still buy, deliver, or accept delivery of gold. You don't have to do it in Shanghai in the main system. You can do it outside. And the next branch, the next fort they are constructing, and it's already underway, is in Saudi Arabia. None of this is being published. We also have the successor to the M Bridge. Already 5 Middle East states and something like 11 Asian states on the redesigned, which permits direct digital exchange between central banks, except dollars, pounds, and euros.
Yes,
we are isolating ourselves from China. I was in China 2 weeks ago for 1 week, Alastair, and what I've noticed is that with your traditional instruments that you use here, e-banking, even WhatsApp and so on, you are totally lost. They are creating their own digital system, which is disconnected from the West.
That's what I call the digital superhighway. I mean, they're creating, and it's not just at the central bank level, it's also at the brick card level and integrating all of this. So, you'll have a new Alipay or whatever it's called, and you'll be able to use it anywhere. And all of that, the balances will be cleared through the bridge system between central banks.
You see, we've been talking now for half hour, and we talked about Gaza, about the US, China, about Iran. And as it's very, very often the case, for half hour, 3 Europeans here, there's a British person, there's 2 Swiss people. We haven't even mentioned Europe. It has fell into complete irrelevance. It's not even mentioned because nobody thinks of Europe as an actor today. We think of America, we think of Israel and what is going on over there, and of course we think of China. What is going on? Why is Europe so much out of touch with the reality? Why is it like just playing in the hands of America?
I think much of what you say, but it is ultimately that Europe that has put itself into this position by a whole series of bad decisions. But if you go back a little earlier and think about, what happened when the Soviet Union collapsed? Well, it opened huge markets for Europe. The former, Soviet republics were opened. Asia was opened, and also resources and cheap energy. And so Europe, we always sold us as affluence. I remember being in Belgrade and listening, I think, a Croatian prime minister saying, well, yes, of course we want to join the EU because it's rather like an ATM. You put in your card and you get out the cash. And
you're talking about Ante Markovic.
Yes. So that's what that was the selling point of Europe, which was successful. And now it's all gone. All of it. The cheap energy is being replaced by expensive energy. The markets are gone because Europe has suffered from those markets for a cost of the United States.
Yes.
Now, if you like, the clout, the political clout, influence that a state like Italy or France or whatever used to have because it was affluent and it was part of Europe, gone. And so they're desperate. And the only thing they can do is wave the flag of war with Russia, war.
Yes.
And attempt to try and keep the project from imploding. And because they are terrified that if they don't, if you like, create the fear, they're only going to get elected again. Who's going to vote for us? Because standards of living are collapsing across Europe.
Yes.
House levels have gone up. Yes, the elites are unpatched. They go on. You look at the sort of occupancy rates of the really top-tier hotels in London and Paris, full. You go down one layer, half full. Further, it's desperate. Go to the restaurants, the 5-star restaurants of Michelin, full. But most restaurants in France and in Paris are half empty.
Well, I have a question regarding the people, the bright people who are advising our decision makers in Europe. I mean, I have met intelligence officers who are really very bright, who have all the information, diplomats also. Those people are not stupid. Are they doctoring their reports so as to please their masters, or do the masters simply not listen?
I remember, you probably know them, of Goldberg. He was sitting at one of these meetings with these very bright, if you like, former cabinet meeting members and military officers. They were starting to say, well, Russia is a basket case, losing so many men. And he said to them, that's just bullshit. It's just not true. And he gave them the figures. And he said, what was really startling is they all knew them, but they wouldn't say them. They all knew them because they could not conceive of a world where the United States does not give the orders. And that was his conclusion. He said,
yes,
they all knew it. They weren't stupid. They knew that these figures about Russia, but they could not conceive of a world where the United States and the West did not give orders.
Horror vacui.
Okay. So,
the fear of the void.
Yeah.
Fear of the void, yes.
Will these protest movements, will this dramatic economic situation, this lack of political cloud of Europe to a reaction in front of the polls?
Yes.
We have elections coming in France, maybe even in Germany, but the alternative doesn't look quite good.
Well,
They
yeah.
are even more pro-Israelis than those in power now, so can't expect much more independence there. Regarding Russia, it's very unclear whether a Front National, maybe AfD would have a. But what to expect? Is there an alternative project?
Well, if you look at the protests, there was this huge Tommy Robinson protest in London quite recently. And it was ostensibly about, waving the flag, because many parts of England have banned the use of the national flag. I mean, for Americans, that must seem very, very strange. But, you're not allowed to fly the St. George's flag in England. The councils regard this as racist of the extreme right, and so they prosecute you and send people to prison for this. And so this was the protest. But the language, the hatred towards the Starmer, I mean, the language was just, you can't repeat it. It was chants, and I mean, so this is where is also at play, is this strong hatred for the establishment, for the elites. Now, throughout Europe, the real problem is there's no way of changing them. That's very easy.
Yes.
Starmer still has a huge majority because of what happened in the election, even though his popularity is on the floor. Macron's popularity is on the floor. Merz's popularity is sliding rapidly. But there's no way, because over these years, particularly from Brussels, what I call the political bridges to a new future, to a new political thing, have been burnt.
Yes.
Cordon there. It is the center rules. We stick with the center. We will not allow anyone outside of the center even to stand an election. If they stand for election, oh yeah, it seems like you committed some financial crime or some sexual peccadillo, and they're right. I'm talking to someone who's in Serbia, so you're more than aware of all these things that are going on in that context. I mean, that is the problem. This is why it will be violent, I'm afraid, because the conclusions of ordinary people is protesting achieves nothing.
Exactly.
You just get slammed and
Exactly.
gasped in Serbia and noise, all sorts of things. Protest doesn't achieve anything. Voting doesn't achieve anything. Look at what they're trying to do in Germany. They hold a mayoral election, and then all AfD are suddenly either die or excluded from the process. So voting doesn't achieve it. So what's left? The only thing that's left is to
Violence.
to take over. Yeah, by a revolution type of violence, and that's destructive. Hugely destructive.
I can see it happening in Serbia, very much so. We are sliding towards violence. It seems to be very clear, but also I would say for Western Europe especially, it's history serves. If history serves, it's clear that peoples do not forgive their governments to lose a war. And now it seems very clear that people in France, in Germany, in England, and elsewhere have understood that the war in Ukraine was just a quagmire, and that they're losing shamefully in a way that is formidably humiliating. And I feel that we're coming to a point where the peoples of Europe are now all protesting in the streets. The next step is hard to imagine, which, as you say, was like revolution.
Well, unfortunately, yes, because the economic situation of Europe, I mean, is effectively bankrupt in many ways. France cannot agree a budget and won't. It will probably have to get bailed out by the ECB. I mean, it's a very serious situation. At the same time, Britain is giving every month 3.5, I think it is, billion pounds to Ukraine. I don't know how much France is giving, but it's still going on. The EU just announced, I saw von der Leyen yesterday announcing another 4 billion of European funds going to Ukraine. I mean, it's just not, this, and at the same time, all the social, the social welfare, or the safety net, if you like, of society is being creates an outrage, particularly the clampdown on free speech. You see this all the time in Britain. People, they just arrested a woman for sent her to prison. They come and knock on your door at 2:30 in the morning and say, come in, we want to come in because we've had a complaint about a social post that you written. I mean, at 2:30 in the morning, they come to do these things.
That's very important. You were mentioning the other day in another podcast the existence of an eighth front, meaning the front of social media, possibly because time is advancing. Could we wrap it up and talk about that? Because this is about the future. This is about technology and free speech. And it's a very important. You're talking about the fact that Netanyahu, but also inside the United States, but also now inside Europe, there is a growing war that is being waged against social media, especially against TikTok and Instagram and Twitter. Could you expand a little bit on that?
Yes, because what has happened and what the killing of Charlie Kirk has done has raised the consciousness, particularly amongst young Americans, both Democrat, but Republican, particularly the MAGA, about the sense that Israel was not only taken over the main media
Mainstream,
and taking over TikTok, but the Israeli influence is now targeting influencers and, if you like, the podcast world of America too, and is producing a sharp, if you like, pushback. And this is a war that Netanyahu said, this is a war that must not be lost. We have to ensure that all of the young American MAGA fully support Israel, and we have to take over and crush any opposition on the if you like, the social media. So this is the war that was described as the eighth front by Netanyahu, or other fronts know. But this one is the eighth front, the war to take control of, if you like, social media in America and to suppress any criticisms of Israel. And so the pushback comes from people like Nick Fuentes and other influencers who point this out. And it's becoming a sharp point of contention in America. And I was just going to say to Jean-Daniel, it's really important because this is going to come to Europe. I mean, it's this tension and conflict, it hasn't yet. But when you say, well, nothing will change because Europe will go on supporting Israel and Gaza nonetheless, that's not the case amongst the young in America now. It's becoming really, really contentious. I'm not going to predict how it's going to play out or what will be the outcome of it. But, most time the midterm elections, I think, is going to be increasingly about this. Because if the young don't vote, and if the MAGA start saying, listen, we voted for America first, not Israel first. That's what we voted for. Why Trump? Are you all totally aligned with Israel on every issue in the Middle East? And so at the moment, it hasn't really penetrated into the European consciousness or into the European, a little bit into the social sphere.
Yes.
It's coming. I think it's coming, and we will see, because the fight is going on in the US. As I say, the key thing is, the midterms in the US generally start quite early. I mean, it's a long process, but I mean, I think it starts really at the beginning of next year. This is why we're having this desperate attempt to get money into the budget and to keep the market and everything, because they want to not have a financial crisis before the midterms. I mean, this is absolutely existential for the Trump administration.
Yes. On the last note, because we're talking about stuff that is pretty grim. We're talking about war, talking about financial meltdown. We're talking about crackdown on free speech. We're talking about irrelevance of Europe. All things that are very grim. With your experience and your point of view, are you in general an optimistic person or a pessimistic person?
Very much an optimistic person.
I'm pleased to hear.
I'm very much an optimistic person because, what I see us going through is a process of catharsis.
Yes.
Catharsis is not pleasant. It's disruptive, painful, but you have to go through catharsis in order to get to the next, if you like, whether it's of civilization or of thinking, of metaphysics, that you have to go through a certain degree of catharsis. The present system is too frozen, too ossified. So we have to go through this process. We just hope it doesn't go out of control and become more bloody than is totally necessary to get through to the catharsis and to sort of re-examine ourselves. And I don't believe it's possible to get out of this, because until we get out of this postmodern nihilism, I don't think we can move to another stage. I'm totally optimistic. I'm not sure I'll see all of it, but I'm quite optimistic that that's where we're going.
Okay, I absolutely share this worldview, and I'm thanking you very much for sharing it with us. It was really, really very interesting, and I hope to have you soon again on the podcast when something else is developing, which happens now every other day.
Thank you so much, Alastair, for sharing.
Thank you so much, and see you soon.
Thank you.